one of the questions that came up from the beginning in terms of setting up the talk was this thing about East and West. And the most micro level being East and West Berlin, already as a conversation. And then Peter said, yes, but now we see this whole growth, like there's contact festivals in Budapest, in Estonia, in Romania, obviously in Moscow, and you know, more things happening in the east of what is now Eastern Europe. And then Dieter said, yeah, but in the United States you have this conversation about the East and the West and how things developed really differently between New York and California. And I was saying that in the East Coast of the United States, what was prioritized historically were formalists, minimalists and formalists. That was the art context that Yvonne Rainer, that Steve Paxton come from. This idea that gender is neutral, that we are working anatomically, and when you get to the West Coast, you have people who completely are much more involved in the lifestyle politics around contact, people who are not interested in purity at all. John LaFan was always, he studied with Anna Halpern, he was very interested in drama, theater, talking during contact improv, comedy, almost psychodrama. You have Anna Halpern's whole evolution of studying natural movement, baby movement, moving into improvisation, moving into ritual. So you have all this, it's a much more complicated, messier story on the West Coast. So that was just a few things that came up, even going, what is East and West? And then also with Israel.
So then there was a question of like, yeah, that contact is a growing movement in Israel, and that when people in Israel suggested that they will organize the next Decide. And as a European contact teachers conference, like Israel is not Europe. So, what is that? And yeah. So like, and not being able to communicate as a German going to Israel because of fascist history. Like I can't blame them for doing apartheid policy or whatever. Like, so like this is difficult. Like going into a country, coming from a country that has a specific history or so.
Can you say the last thing again about Israel? You can't go as a German?
Wenn ich als Deutscher nach Israel gehe und aus einem Land komme, wo es einen Nationalsozialismus gegeben hat oder so, und ich komme in ein Land, das eine aktive Besetzungspolitik betreibt oder irgendwie was eine Apartheidsregime ist auf einer bestimmten Art und Weise, dann ist es für mich schwierig, mein Maul aufzumachen, weil ich aus einem Land komme, was dazu eine ganz bestimmte Vergangenheit hat. Aber dann war eine Frage, wenn wir über Ost, if we talk about East and West, why don't we talk North and South? And I was surprised in the New Contact Quarterly, like in the editorial, like it says like contact is happening everywhere on this planet except Antarctica, and like where in Africa and in Arabian countries is contact? Sorry.
Well, and the answer is, and this happens even at CIPR, the answer is because it's happening in Johannesburg. Because it's happening in South Africa. That's the answer. I would say also Faustin Lenyukula is doing it in Congo, but...
Where?
In Congo.
Congo.
And there are a few other experiments that some contemporary people have started to do. But overall, these people are not participating in any larger contact scene unless they have European roots and they live in Africa. So again, it's this, and this actually comes up for me about is Israel European or not, because in a way, it's hybrid. What's our translation for this? Mishpah. You know, so, but that European culture is actually a very strong aspect of Israeli culture. So the idea that they might consider themselves European is not so far away when you think that, well, many of them are Russian, many of them are American, and the rest are Polish, Ukrainian, German, Hungarian. Do you know what I mean? In terms of like what their history is. So, and then how that history meets on Middle East history. So, to me, this coming together or this conflict of like, it brought up this whole, where were we? We were talking anthropology, and if you study contact as an anthropologically or from ethnography, is it a European form? And so when it spreads, And we say it's all over the world, but it's really only where European people are.
And if it's about exchange, why is the information only flying in one direction and not in the other?
Yeah.
Like, why is it that hardly ever European contact teachers get invited to the States? Yeah.
Or for that matter, that contact improvisation looks somewhat the same everywhere. Like there's some of the same qualities in places that
also because American institutions cannot afford to fly European people over.
Well, it's more than that. The American institutions that have money generally don't recognize contact improvisation. So all of the workshops happening in the United States are actually organized by very small grassroots organizations. So they don't bring anyone anywhere. We don't bring Steve Paxton to the West Coast. Nancy Stark-Smith comes to California every 5 years, maybe. Like we don't fly teachers around the country. The contact teachers in the United States, basically, unless they go to the Seattle Festival, is the one festival that brings a couple people.
ADF.
Yeah, ADF will bring only contactors who are working in contemporary dance, like Kathleen Hermesdorf, now bringing Ishmael Houston-Jones. But yeah, in general, there's no one flying anyone, so that becomes part of the whole complexity.
But you mean with the only one direction, that only American teachers are coming to Europe? Well,
Yeah.
okay. And not European teachers are going to teach in America?
Yeah.
Okay.
Asian teachers going to Asia.
Yeah, no, like it's depending on which way you travel, like the pattern, so like
rotation, exactly.
But I do think that, for example, there is different approaches in how it's promoted or like presented or like structured in Europe and in the States.
And it has a lot to do with politics and the cultural system. For example, Goethe Institute is giving money to fly teachers, for example, to Johannesburg, or other countries are doing that. That's why parts students are now in Johannesburg and they with the system there. But to have the back track, it's more difficult. So when I try to do that, it's more like we cannot afford, or there's not the system behind that.
Just a question to understanding. The Goethe Institute is not sponsoring part students to perform in Johannesburg.
No. There was a lack maybe. but to get Goethe money to bring a teacher from here to America, to the USA, it's much more difficult than to bring it to Estland or South Africa or somewhere else.
Yeah. Although if an American institution asked the Goethe Institute for money, they would get it. I mean, German artists go to the United States. It's just rare. When Sasha Waltz performs in California, she's getting money from Germany to go. No American institution fully pays for European artists, but when it goes the other direction, it is not like that.